The cafe was alive with the familiar hum of conversation, the soft clinking of cups, the hiss of the espresso machine, and the low chatter of patrons enjoying their afternoon. Sunlight spilled through the windows, casting a warm glow on the polished wooden floors and the rows of pastries displayed behind the glass case. Everything seemed ordinary, almost peaceful, until a sudden commotion shattered the calm. In the middle of the crowded room, a young waitress stood frozen, her face a mixture of shock, humiliation, and fear. A group of bullies had cornered her near the counter, and with cruel laughter, one of them had ripped her skirt. The sound of tearing fabric echoed unnervingly, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Patrons gasped, some covering their mouths in disbelief, while others instinctively reached for their phones to capture the scene. The girl's hands clutched the torn skirt instinctively, trying to shield herself, but it was no use. The damage was done. Her eyes darted around, searching for help, for someone, anyone, who could stop the bully's cruel display. Her voice caught in her throat. The words she wanted to say were swallowed by the overwhelming fear and shock. The bullies laughed, shoving each other lightly as if this were some twisted game. Their arrogance filled the room, making the young waitress feel smaller with every passing second. The cafe staff exchanged worried glances, unsure how to intervene. Rules and protocol mattered little in this moment. Fear and intimidation had taken over. And then, the door swung open. Time seemed to slow as a figure entered the cafe. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He didn't storm in. He walked in calmly, almost casually. But there was a presence about him, a quiet intensity that made the room shift. Heads turned instinctively. Conversations halted. Even the bullies noticed him, their laughter faltering for the briefest moment. It was Keanu Reeves. The bullies' confidence wavered, though they didn't yet know why. They assumed he was just another customer, maybe a celebrity fan or someone passing through. But they were about to learn a hard lesson. Some forces cannot be intimidated, some power cannot be challenged with cruelty, and some authority doesn't need to yell to be felt. In that instant, the cafe held its collective breath. The bullies had no idea what was coming, and what followed would leave them instantly regretting every cruel action they had taken. The cafe had always been a small, cozy place where locals came for coffee, pastries, and friendly chatter. The kind of place where regulars knew the staff by name, and the young waitress moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays with practiced ease. But that calm afternoon had suddenly transformed into chaos. The bullies, a group of 3 young men, had decided to make the cafe their stage. Their laughter was loud, crude, and filled with a sense of power that came from the fear of others. They cornered the waitress near the counter, teasing and mocking her, escalating to the cruel act of ripping her skirt. Patrons froze, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe the shocking scene. Some gasped audibly. Others instinctively reached for their phones, wanting to capture the moment before someone else stepped in. The young waitress tried to stay composed. She had faced difficult customers before, but never something like this. Her hands gripped the torn fabric instinctively, her face a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and fear. She wanted to speak up, to confront them, but the shock and the crowd's silence made her hesitate. The humiliation weighed heavily on her, yet she refused to let tears fall. She would not give them the satisfaction. Meanwhile, the cafe staff exchanged nervous glances. The manager, standing behind the counter, tried to intervene verbally, but the bullies ignored him, confident in their impunity. Chairs scraped against the floor as they moved, pushing customers aside without concern. Their arrogance filled the room. It was a scene of dominance, a small display of cruelty, and yet something about it felt wrong even to the casual onlookers. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the atmosphere shifted. The door swung open again, this time with purpose. A calm presence entered, not hurried, not dramatic, but deliberate. His stride was measured, each step commanding attention without a word. The chatter and clinking of cups seemed to quiet in his wake. The sunlight through the windows highlighted his figure as he walked toward the center of the cafe. And suddenly, every head turned. It was Keanu Reeves. The bullies, still caught up in their mockery, noticed him only as he approached. They snickered, assuming he was just another patron, maybe an older man trying to keep the peace, or someone observing quietly. But the subtle intensity in his eyes, The calm that radiated from him told a different story. He didn't raise his voice, and yet the energy in the room began to shift. Customers felt it first, a quiet command that demanded attention, a presence that made them sit straighter and watch. The young waitress's eyes widened slightly as she recognized him. Relief flickered across her face, not because she expected violence, but because she sensed protection. She knew instinctively that this man, calm, composed, confident, would ensure the bully's arrogance would meet the consequences it deserved. The bullies, however, still smirked, laughing nervously now, but unaware that the storm had already arrived. Their arrogance blinded them to the fact that appearances can deceive, and that some people, some presences, carry authority that doesn't need to yell or strike to be felt. Keanu paused briefly near the counter, his gaze sweeping across the cafe, taking in every detail: the torn skirt, the frightened waitress, the smug bullies, the shocked patrons. His presence alone had already changed the dynamic. The bullies' laughter began to falter, replaced by the faintest hint of unease, the first cracks in their facade of confidence. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone could feel it. The confrontation was about to begin, but this would not be a fight of brute force. This would be a lesson in calm authority, quiet courage, and instant justice. And for the bullies, the regret was only moments away. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. The bullies, who had moments ago laughed and jeered, now found themselves uncertain, their confidence wavering for the first time. Keanu Reeves stood near the counter, calm and composed, yet every ounce of his presence radiated authority. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to act aggressively. The room had already shifted, and the bullies could feel it. One of them, the apparent ringleader, leaned against a table, smirking nervously. "Who's this guy? Just some old dude trying to look important," he muttered to his friends, though the edge in his voice betrayed his unease. They exchanged quick glances, sensing that perhaps this wasn't going to be as easy as they had assumed. The young waitress, clutching her torn skirt, took a small step back. Her eyes met Keanu's, and she felt a flicker of relief wash over her. Not because she expected a fight, but because she knew instinctively that he commanded respect in a way that no amount of intimidation could undermine. She straightened slightly, a subtle shift in posture that reflected newfound confidence. Keanu's gaze swept across the cafe, taking in the frightened patrons, the bold bullies, and the staff who were frozen in uncertainty. Every movement, every subtle expression was noted. His calmness was deliberate, measured, sending a message louder than any words could. He was in control, and the bully's arrogance would meet consequences without unnecessary violence. The ringleader took a step forward, trying to reassert dominance. "Hey, calm down, man. It's just a joke. Relax." His voice was louder than before, trying to mask his rising panic. But even as he spoke, his bravado faltered. Keanu's eyes met his, steady and unflinching, a silent force that made the man shrink slightly under the weight of judgment. Another bully snickered nervously, but the laughter died in his throat. He had expected the room to side with them, or at least remain indifferent. Instead, the cafe seemed aligned with Keanu, every witness watching, waiting, silently condemning the cruelty. The energy of the room was a quiet but undeniable force, and it pressed against the bullies like invisible walls. The young waitress found her voice for the first time. "Stop it," she said firmly, her tone sharp but calm. "You have no right." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't desperation. It was a statement of courage. She stood straighter, empowered by the presence of Keanu, who nodded slightly in acknowledgement. The ringleader's smirk faltered. His friends shifted uneasily behind him. The cafe, once filled with casual chatter and clinking cups, was now a stage for quiet authority. Keanu took a single step closer, his gaze unyielding, and the bullies could feel the weight of his calm judgment bearing down on them. "Is there a problem here?" Keanu asked, his voice even, low, and commanding. Every word carried the weight of unspoken consequences. The bullies hesitated. The smirks faded. Fear replaced arrogance. They had underestimated the quiet power that came not from shouting or aggression, but from presence, composure, and integrity. The room waited. Silence dominated. And in that moment, it became clear. The bully's cruelty had met its reckoning, not through fists or fury, but through calm, undeniable authority. The regret had already begun to set in, though they had yet to fully comprehend the lesson they were about to learn. The cafe had gone utterly silent. Patrons who had been whispering, holding their phones ready, now froze, eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. The young waitress, her torn skirt clutched in one hand, took a hesitant step back, her pulse racing. The bullies, who had moments ago exuded arrogant confidence, now shifted uneasily, their laughter gone and replaced with a growing sense of dread. Keanu Reeves stood near the counter, calm, composed, and utterly unshaken. His presence seemed to expand, filling the room with an invisible weight of authority. Every movement he made was deliberate, every glance purposeful. He didn't need to raise his voice. The quiet intensity of his demeanor spoke volumes. One of the bullies, the self-appointed ringleader, tried to mask his unease. "Look, man, we were just joking," he said, his voice slightly higher than intended. His friends shuffled behind him, trying to appear indifferent, but the tension radiating from Keanu was impossible to ignore. The young waitress, emboldened by the quiet support she felt, squared her shoulders and spoke again. "It wasn't a joke. It was cruel. And you need to understand that actions like this have consequences." Her voice carried a quiet authority of its own, amplified by the fact that Keanu was standing beside her, a silent, reassuring presence. Keanu stepped forward, and the subtle shift in the atmosphere was palpable. The patrons leaned forward slightly in their seats, captivated. The bullies instinctively took a half-step back, a subtle acknowledgement that they were no longer in control. "Do you realize what you've done?" Keanu asked, his voice calm but commanding. "You humiliated someone. You attacked someone weaker than you. And you assumed nobody would intervene." His gaze swept over each of them, unflinching, as though measuring not just their actions, but the very character within them. The ringleader's bravado began to crumble. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck, tangled in his throat. His friends glanced nervously at each other, the cracks in their confidence widening. Every patron watching felt the weight of Keanu's quiet authority pressing down, making it impossible for the bullies to maintain their earlier arrogance. Then came the final revelation, subtle but devastating. Keanu gestured toward the young waitress, his voice steady. "And you, sir," he said, locking eyes with the ringleader, "have no idea who you were messing with." A hush fell over the room. The bully's eyes flicked from the waitress to Keanu, confusion and panic beginning to overtake them. Some of the patrons whispered in recognition. Others simply gasped, sensing the shift in the power dynamic. The energy in the cafe had completely changed. "You thought this was a game," Keanu continued, his tone calm, almost serene. "But cruelty has consequences, and arrogance meets its match in those who do not respond with fear, but with integrity and presence." The bullies finally realized the full scope of their mistake. Their laughter, once loud and mocking, had vanished completely. Faces pale, they shuffled backward toward the exit, each step heavy with the weight of immediate regret. The cafe's patrons watched in awe as Keanu's quiet authority had dismantled the entire situation without a single act of aggression. The young waitress breathed a small sigh of relief. Her eyes met Keanu's, and she felt a surge of gratitude and reassurance. She had endured fear and humiliation, but now she stood protected, her dignity restored. Keanu's calm presence had transformed what could have been a traumatic moment into a powerful lesson for everyone present. The patrons whispered among themselves, replaying the scene in their minds. The arrogance of the bullies, the courage of the young waitress, and the quiet, commanding force of Keanu Reeves. It was a lesson in humility, courage, and the power of presence that no one would forget. The bullies, meanwhile, exited the cafe as quietly as possible, their earlier confidence shattered. They had come to dominate, to intimidate, but they left humbled, reminded that arrogance is fragile when faced with calm courage. Keanu remained near the counter, his gaze briefly resting on the young waitress. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, a small, grateful smile crossing her face. No words could fully express the relief, the admiration, or the sense of safety she now felt. In that moment, the cafe returned to its normal rhythm. Cups clinked, espresso machines hissed, and the sunlight glinted off the polished floors. But the lesson lingered. Arrogance, cruelty, and intimidation could not withstand the quiet, undeniable power of integrity, presence, and courage. The cafe had begun to settle after the tense confrontation, but the energy in the room was far from normal. Patrons whispered to each other, replaying the scene they had just witnessed. Bullies who had assumed power, a young waitress terrified and humiliated, and the calm, commanding presence of Keanu Reeves that had turned everything upside down. The air still crackled with anticipation, as if everyone knew that the events were not yet fully resolved. The bullies huddled near the exit, their confidence shattered. The ringleader, who had laughed the loudest and acted the most aggressive, now looked small and unsure, like a child caught in a lesson too large for him to comprehend. His friends mirrored his unease, shuffling awkwardly, avoiding eye contact with the other patrons, and especially with Keanu, whose gaze was unwavering and full of quiet authority. Keanu took a deliberate step forward, his calmness radiating through the cafe like a wave. He did not need to raise his voice. Every muscle in his body was relaxed, yet the intensity in his eyes communicated everything necessary: accountability, judgment, and protection. Actions have consequences, he said softly but firmly, his voice carrying effortlessly over the silence. What you did to her was not a joke. It was cruel. It was unnecessary. And it is not acceptable in any space where people deserve respect and safety. The ringleader's eyes flickered nervously. He opened his mouth, trying to defend himself, but no words could undo the damage. Keanu's presence alone made it impossible to maintain false bravado. The patrons, staff, and even the young waitress were watching closely, feeling the weight of justice being delivered without a single raised hand. The young waitress, now standing a few steps behind him, straightened her posture. She felt a mix of relief and empowerment, knowing that she was protected and supported. Keanu's calm authority gave her the courage to speak, and she added quietly, yet firmly, "This isn't about fear. This isn't about threats. It's about fairness. Respect is earned through actions, not intimidation." The bullies shifted uneasily. The ringleader swallowed hard, finally understanding that their behavior had crossed a line. The cafe staff, previously frozen with uncertainty, now stepped forward, gently guiding the bullies toward the exit and ensuring no further harassment occurred. Even the customers, previously bystanders, felt a sense of empowerment, that standing by while injustice occurs is no longer an option. Keanu knelt slightly beside the waitress, checking that she was unharmed beyond the immediate humiliation and minor physical discomfort. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone calm and reassuring. She nodded, her confidence gradually returning. "Yes," she said softly. "Thank you." As the bullies exited, heads bowed in shame, the cafe slowly returned to normal. The espresso machine hissed, cups clinked, and the chatter resumed, but the lesson of the moment lingered. Everyone present had witnessed how courage paired with calm authority could neutralize cruelty without aggression. The patrons whispered to one another, some nodding in agreement, some visibly inspired. Phones were lowered, and the energy in the room shifted from fear to admiration. They had seen that power does not come from intimidation, and respect is not demanded. It is earned. Keanu stood, gently placing a reassuring hand on the waitress's shoulder. "Your courage mattered," he said. "You stood your ground, and you did not allow fear to dictate your actions. Remember that strength is quiet, but undeniable." The young waitress's eyes sparkled with gratitude. For the first time since the incident began, she smiled. The tension that had gripped her chest melted slightly, replaced by relief and empowerment. The cafe had returned to its normal rhythm, but the memory of the confrontation would remain indelible. The bullies had left humbled, the patrons inspired, and the young waitress stronger than before. And in the center of it all, Keanu Reeves had shown that true authority does not rely on fear or aggression. It relies on presence, integrity, and the courage to act when others fail. In that moment, everyone understood a simple truth. Cruelty cannot withstand calm courage. Arrogance and intimidation crumble in the face of integrity, and the quiet force of presence can protect the vulnerable while teaching lessons the loudest voices could never convey. The cafe had finally quieted. The clinking of cups, the soft chatter, and the faint hiss of the espresso machine returned, but the energy in the room had fundamentally changed. Patrons who had once been observers were now witnesses to a powerful lesson, a moment that would linger long after the doors closed and the sun set over the city streets. The young waitress, whose skirt had been cruelly ripped moments before, now stood tall. Her shoulders were straighter, her hands no longer trembling. She had endured fear, humiliation, and the blatant cruelty of the bullies. Yet she had emerged stronger, supported by quiet courage and presence. Keanu Reeves had not shouted. He had not resorted to violence. Yet his authority had delivered justice in a way that none of the bullies could have anticipated. Patrons whispered among themselves, replaying the events in their minds. "Did you see how calm he was?" one murmured. "He didn't even need to raise his voice." Another added, "It's incredible. The bullies didn't know what hit them." People were realizing something profound. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it simply stands, unwavering, commanding respect without intimidation. The bullies, meanwhile, had left the cafe in shame. Their laughter was gone, replaced by silence and self-consciousness. They had believed arrogance and intimidation would grant them power, but they had underestimated the impact of integrity and calm authority. For them, the lesson was immediate and unforgettable. Cruelty carries consequences, and true power is far more subtle and far more effective than brute force. Keanu Reeves knelt beside the young waitress briefly, ensuring she was unharmed. "You were strong," he said softly, his calm tone full of reassurance. "Not because you didn't feel fear, but because you didn't let fear control your actions. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to act despite it." She nodded, absorbing the weight of his words, feeling empowered in a way that no confrontation or punishment could have provided. The cafe staff, previously hesitant, now understood the full scope of the lesson. Authority does not always come from position or title. Sometimes it comes from character, presence, and integrity. By standing with calm courage, they had witnessed a transformation. The frightened became empowered, the arrogant humbled, and the bystanders inspired. Keanu's presence, though quiet, had shifted the entire room. He had demonstrated that intervention does not always require aggression, and that respect is earned through fairness, protection, and unwavering integrity. The lesson was not just for the bullies or the staff. It was for everyone present. It was a lesson in humanity, dignity, and the power of quiet strength. As the young waitress straightened her uniform and smiled faintly, the crowd realized the significance of what had just occurred. This was more than a confrontation. It was a demonstration of true influence and authority. It reminded everyone that cruelty may be loud, but integrity is louder. That fear can dominate temporarily, but courage endures. That arrogance can crumble before quiet strength, and that the right actions can inspire a room, even a city. Speech balloon type respect. If you believe true strength comes from courage, calm, and integrity. Speech balloon share where you're watching from. Home, work, cafe, or somewhere else. And tell us what lesson stood out to you the most. The cafe returned to normal. Coffee machines hissed, spoons clinked, and conversations resumed. Yet the lesson remained imprinted on every mind in the room. True authority does not demand obedience, it earns it. True courage does not rely on aggression, it inspires. And the quiet, steadfast presence of someone who stands for justice can change everything, instantly. In the end, the young waitress had regained her dignity. The bullies had learned humility. The patrons had been reminded that courage and integrity matter more than loudness or cruelty. And Keanu Reeves, in his quiet, calm way, had taught a lesson that no one would ever forget. Real power is silent, unwavering, and undeniable. The cafe had returned to its normal rhythm. The espresso machine hissed, cups clinked, and soft conversations resumed. Yet the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted. What had started as a moment of fear, cruelty, and chaos had transformed into a lesson in courage, dignity, and the undeniable power of calm authority. Everyone who had witnessed the scene knew they had seen something extraordinary. The young waitress, who had been humiliated only moments before, now stood tall. Her torn skirt was mended temporarily with a careful adjustment, but it was more than the fabric that had been restored. Her confidence, her poise, and her sense of self-worth had returned, stronger than before. She had endured the cruelty of the bullies and emerged not broken, but empowered, knowing that injustice could be met with integrity and calm courage. Keanu Reeves, standing quietly beside her, did not raise his voice or strike a blow, yet his presence alone had shifted the entire dynamic. He had demonstrated a truth that is often forgotten in moments of fear. True strength is silent, influence is subtle, and courage does not need to shout to be effective. Every patron in the cafe had felt it. The bullies had been humbled, the staff had been inspired, and the witnesses had learned that power does not always come from aggression or intimidation. The bullies, who had believed their cruelty could dominate the room, had left in shame. Their confidence was gone, replaced with the realization that arrogance and intimidation are fragile when confronted with quiet integrity. For them, the lesson was immediate and unforgettable. Actions have consequences, and respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. Patrons whispered among themselves, reflecting on the incident. "Did you see that?" One said. "He didn't even need to yell, and they were already afraid." Another added, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands there and the world changes." The cafe had witnessed not just a confrontation, but a demonstration of true moral authority, calm, unwavering, and undeniably effective. Keanu turned to the young waitress, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "strength is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to act with integrity, even when others try to intimidate you. Courage is choosing the right action, even when it's difficult, and respect is earned, not demanded." She nodded, absorbing the lesson, feeling a sense of empowerment she had never experienced before. The incident became more than just a story of bullies and a frightened waitress. It became a lesson for every witness. Arrogance and cruelty can only dominate briefly, but integrity, calm courage, and quiet authority endure. It was a reminder that strength is measured not by volume, force, or aggression, but by the impact of one's presence and actions. Speech balloon type respect if you believe courage, calm, and integrity are real power. Speech balloon share where you're watching from, cafe, home, or somewhere unexpected, and tell us which lesson inspired you most. As Keanu and the waitress left the cafe, the sunlight outside caught the glint of her eyes. No longer fearful, but determined. The bullies would remember the lesson for years. The patrons would carry the story forward, inspired to stand up against cruelty in their own lives. And the quiet power of presence, integrity, and courage had once again proven that true authority is seen, felt, and respected, without a single raised hand or shouted word. In the end, the cafe returned to normal, but the memory of the day remained etched in every heart. The power of calm, the strength of courage, and the enduring force of respect would never be forgotten.